British television has always known how to show war. What it has struggled with is something much harder. What happens when nothing can be done? What happens when the war is no longer about action? What happens when there is nothing left to fight? Tenko, first broadcast by the BBC in 1981, sits exactly in that space. It is a war drama, but it is not about battles. It is not about strategy or victory or even defeat in any conventional sense. Instead, it is about captivity, about waiting, about survival in conditions where agency has been stripped away. And more than that, it is about something television had rarely attempted with this level of seriousness: endurance. The premise of Tenko is straightforward. A group of British, Dutch, and Australian women are taken prisoner by the Japanese during the Second World War and held in internment camps in Southeast Asia. From that point on, the series follows their lives in captivity. But that description, while accurate, is almost misleading, because Tenko is not driven by plot in the conventional sense. There are events, of course, transfers between camps, changes in authority, illness, death, moments of conflict, moments of solidarity. But these are not arranged into the kind of narrative arc that television drama often relies upon. There is no sense that things are building towards a resolution. Instead, Tenko presents a condition, and then it stays there. That is where the series becomes particularly interesting in the context of British television, because television, structurally, tends to resist stasis. Episodes are expected to move, characters are expected to change, problems are introduced and then resolved, even if only partially. There is an assumption of progress, even in serial form. But Tenko deliberately works against that instinct. It is not about change, it is about persistence. What does that mean in practice? It means that the drama is not located in what happens, but in how people continue. Food is scarce, authority is arbitrary, the future is uncertain, and yet the central question of the series is not how will they escape or how will this end? It is much simpler than that. How do you get through the day? And then the next, and then the next. This is a very different kind of tension. In most war dramas, tension is external. It comes from threat, from action, from movement. Something is about to happen, or something is being prevented from happening. In Tenko, tension is internal and cumulative. It comes from the slow erosion of certainty, from the pressure of routine under extreme conditions, from the knowledge that there may be no immediate change, no rescue, no resolution. And that is much harder for television to sustain because it requires the audience to sit with it. What allows Tenko to do this is its focus on character, not in the sense of individual heroism, but in the sense of social structure. The camp becomes a kind of enforced community. People from different backgrounds, different nationalities, different expectations of life, all placed in the same constrained environment. And within that environment, hierarchies re-emerge. Leadership is negotiated, authority is contested, roles are assigned, resisted, and adapted. It is, in effect, a society under pressure. And this is where Tenko stops being a war drama and becomes something else. What is particularly striking is how ordinary much of this feels. There are no grand speeches about survival, no constant reminders of the wider war. Instead, the drama is located in small interactions. Who gets what share of food? Who takes responsibility? Who refuses? Who breaks? Who keeps going? This is where Tenko connects to a broader tradition in British television, a tradition of seriousness that does not rely on spectacle. You can see it in the work of writers like Nigel Neal, where the focus is not on what is shown, but on what is implied, on atmosphere, on pressure, on the unseen forces shaping behaviour. But Tenko applies that approach to a different subject. Not science fiction, not the uncanny, but human endurance under extreme constraint. And in doing so, it expands what television drama can be, because it demonstrates that you do not need constant escalation to maintain engagement. You need clarity of condition. You need characters who are defined by how they respond to that condition, and you need the confidence to let the situation speak for itself. There is also something else at work in Tenko, something that was relatively unusual for British television at the time. Its focus on women. War on television had, for the most part, been framed through male experience. Soldiers, officers, resistance fighters, all operating within the structure that television understood well. Tenko shifts that perspective. It places women at the centre of the narrative, not as adjuncts to the war, but as its primary subjects within this context. And that shift is not treated as novelty, it is treated as reality. And this matters because it changes the nature of the drama. The questions are different. Not how do we win, but how do we organise ourselves? And not how do we fight, but how do we endure? And those questions lead to a different kind of storytelling, one that is less about action and more about negotiation, resilience, and the maintenance of identity under pressure. Identity, in fact, becomes one of the central concerns of the series. In a situation where external markers of status are removed, what remains? Nationality still matters, but it is no longer sufficient. Class distinctions persist, but they are altered by circumstance. Personal histories shape behaviour, but they do not determine it entirely. The camp strips things back, and what emerges is not a simplified version of society, but a more exposed one. And this is where Tenko becomes subversive, because it does not offer easy moral structures. There are no clear heroes and villains among the prisoners. There are disagreements, conflicts, failures of judgment. People behave well and they behave badly, sometimes both in the same episode. And that complexity is allowed to stand. From a production point of view, this is also a very controlled piece of television. The settings are limited, the visual palette is restrained. There is no attempt to create spectacle where it does not belong. Instead, the emphasis is on performance, on dialogue, on the accumulation of detail, and that restraint is part of what gives the series its weight, because it refuses to distract. It is also worth considering when Tenko appears. The early 1980s is a period in which British television is increasingly confident in its ability to handle serious material. There is a willingness to engage with history in ways that are not purely celebratory or heroic. But even within that context, Tenko stands out because it does not frame its subject as exceptional. It presents it as something that happened and then asks what that means in human terms. There is no single moment in Tenko that defines it, no episode that serves as a climax in the traditional sense. And that is entirely the point, because the series is not structured around peaks, it is structured around duration. And duration is something television as a medium is uniquely suited to explore. Cinema can depict intensity, it can compress experience into a limited time frame, but television, particularly serial television, can extend. It can return to the same situation again and again, allowing the audience to experience not just events, but their continuation. Tenko uses that quality to its full extent. It does not rush. It does not resolve. It remains. And in doing so, it asks something of the audience: patience, attention, a willingness to engage with a form of drama that is not driven by immediate reward, but by gradual understanding. This is not always comfortable. There are moments where very little appears to happen, where the drama is almost entirely internal, where the significance of a scene lies not in what is said, but in what is implied. But over time, that accumulation becomes the point, because endurance, by its nature, is not dramatic in the conventional sense. It is repetitive, it is incremental, it is lived. And that is what Tenko captures, not the moment of crisis, but the continuation after it. So what does television learn from Tenko? It learns that drama does not require constant movement. It learns that character can be defined through persistence as much as through action. It learns that seriousness does not have to announce itself loudly. And perhaps most importantly, it learns that some stories are not about change. They are about survival within the absence of change. That is a difficult lesson, because it runs counter to many of the instincts of television production, but it is also a valuable one because it expands the range of what television can do. Tenko does not resolve easily. It does not offer simple conclusions or clear emotional release. Instead, it leaves you with a sense of what it means to continue. And in that sense, it is not just a war drama, it is something more specific. Because Tenko is not really about war at all. It is about the thing television rarely attempts, not conflict, but endurance. Thank you very much for listening. I always appreciate anyone who gets this far into a video. I highly recommend Tenko, but I will be back on another day with another television show. Bye.